every single achievement that Bronny has, really, honestly, until he becomes the MVP or wins the title or something, if that does happen, like it's going to be because of his father. Just him standing up on his own. LeBron took that away from him. When LeBron was in high school, he earned that. His parents didn't give him that media attention. The parents didn't put him on the cover of Sports Illustrated. LeBron did that. LeBron was the number one drafted pick in the NBA. LeBron had the great debut in his first game. LeBron, put Cleveland on his back. No one else did. LeBron earned that. And with his son, he has been coddled and protected. Let's just keep it real. And if his last name was Bronny, I don't know, Richardson, I mean, would he be in the NBA? Probably not. Probably playing overseas or, in the G League somewhere.
Welcome to In the Lab with Hoopsology. I am your host, Matt Thomas, joined by my co-host and best friend, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing?
Good, man. Good. Kind of recovering from March Madness. We'll kind of get to it in a second, but kind of keep my spirits up. Always is a downer month because what we're going to talk about. Always cool to see all the teams go at it. And also just college sports too. I mean, it's collegiate wrestling championships. I think even cheerleading has their collegiate championships. So if you're a fan of college sports, I mean, this is the perfect month for you.
Yeah, and I think even if you're a fan of sports, there's a lot going on right now. And especially if you're a fan of basketball, the NBA, we're very, very close to the playoffs as well. So there's a lot going on. Of course, we'll get into some big topics today regarding that. Quick shout outs to our co-host, Alan, who's a little under the weather today. So obviously hoping he recovers. This is not a load management situation. He's really sick. Shout out to Alan. Hope you feel better, man. And then also big shout out to all the new listeners, subscribers to our podcast feed and or YouTube channel. Just a reminder, if you have a buddy who's into sports and these bigger picture, higher level discussions and great sports interviews, please refer them to our podcast. We really appreciate it. You guys help us grow the show, and we always look forward to and strive to bring you some of the best basketball content that's out there in the podcast world. So once again, thank you for all your support. Justin, before we get into our main topics today, we should touch on March Madness. Shout out to the New Mexico Lobos, who I think had an overwhelmingly successful season, number one seed in the Mountain West. Unfortunately, did bow out early in the Mountain West tournament, which I think resulted in a lower seeding than perhaps they should have gotten, but still, as a 10 seed, pulled off the upset in the first round over 7 seed Marquette. That makes me pretty happy overall. And then did some things in the first half against the 2 seed Michigan State, but in the second half seemed like there were adjustments there from the Michigan State side, and they did knock the Lobos out in the second round. Overall, when you look at the history of the school, an overwhelmingly successful season. But what are your thoughts on the Lobos? And then I just wanted to pick your brain if you had any other thoughts about the tournament in general.
Yeah, several. And this is kind of linked to my conversation with Jeff Tiberi, which that's interview is up now. The author of The Magnificent Seven, a book about this college basketball blue bloods. And I think it's just kind of goes, just reflecting. I didn't see the first half, unfortunately. I was traveling, caught the second half, just unpacking our stuff coming back to Denver. But I think very proud of Pitino, how he was able to take a program that was in turmoil. And this was not a team that was in great spirits when he took it over. And just a lot of baggage from even the Alfred era. I mean, that's a long time ago. And for him to turn around, for him to have this success of multiple tournament appearances, Mountain West Conference tournament wins and regular season wins, that's a big coup and I think should be really a tip of a cap to him, especially in this climate. I mean, where we're growing up, man, I mean, you remember just the rivalries and the stability of the conference of, BYU, Utah, San Diego State, all these schools that were power schools. And as a kid, you hate these schools, right? When you get older, it's kind of like you need them. So you kind of miss them when they're gone. I think that's kind of being the weird thing about being a sports fan as an adult is missing your rivals.
Yeah, you realize you got to root for your rivals.
Yeah, you got to root for them. Yeah, it's different.
If you're not playing for them, you got to root for them.
Yeah, exactly. Compared to pro sports, I mean, you can hate the Cowboys. I mean, they're going to stay in the NFL. So, but at college, you need your rivals. And I just think with UNM, unfortunately, today, as we record this podcast, I believe Donovan Dent has entered the transfer portal. I mean, I'm for player rights and player empowerment, but it is getting it's basically like free agency. I mean, the way it was worded, him announcing, it's like he's going to test the market. I mean, that's free agency talk.
Yeah.
So I think it's really hard, especially for a smaller school, when you have players that maybe are like not super popular when they get to UNM, and then all of a sudden they have great seasons and then they want to leave. So I mean, that's not how professional sports, right? I mean, you sign a contract. I mean, if you sign a contract for how many years, you have to, there's things. It seems like in college basketball, you can just leave whenever you want. I mean, I just feel here for the Lobos, I think it's just going to be incredibly tough to keep their head coach because he's having huge success. And it's a double-edged sword because, of course I want the Lobos to go to the Sweet 16. That's never been done before on the men's side. But at the same time, if he does, I mean, he's guaranteed gone. I mean, he's doing something that's impossible. Has never been done before on the men's side. But even then, with his success, I mean, what's the incentive of him really staying there if the players are going to bounce in the transfer portal? I mean, I realize other schools are having that issue too, but UNM especially, they're a small school. And so I just think it's tough with what's going on. It doesn't necessarily always benefit them. We'll see. Very proud of the team. I know I was very pessimistic on this season. I was probably more downer in our group chat compared to you all. But at the same time, still impressed with their run in their second round matchup with Michigan State. I thought they played well. So
no, you bring up a lot of great points there. And no, I mean, realistically speaking, I mean, there is no incentive for Coach Pitino to stay, in my opinion, because in this kind of mid-major situation, like you said, and case in point with Donovan Dent, if players are going to test the market like that, which is appealing if you improve your own stock, and if it's not against the rules, which it's not at this point, the rules have made it thus that it only makes business sense for Coach Pitino. Every season is going to be so volatile being on a mid-major team that you got to strike while the iron's hot and try to lock up a deal with a school like a major program in one of the power conferences. If you can get it, you'll still every year as a college coach with these transfer rules, you'll have that instability and that volatility, but it won't be to as high a degree as in a mid-major program where it is harder, at least historically, to bounce back from losing a former player of the year like Donovan Dent. That's just a very big blow to the program. So honestly, I mean, I sit around and it would not shock me at all to hear news come down that Coach Pitino found something else and is leaving the program. But that's just the way things are right now. I do think there should be rule changes to a certain degree on these transfer things, or maybe you take NIL deals and you make them like contracts for the schools that have a little bit more staying power tied to them. I think that would be an unpopular take among sports media, maybe generally speaking, and maybe even among casual fans. But I do think this is something that is causing a hit in college sports right now, as we've discussed. And Coach Alford even had some words about this for Nevada that I thought were some great points that he made. I'm sure he took heat for saying what he did, but when you look at the goal of team building, when you look at the original goals of collegiate athletics and things like that, I think he makes a lot of points that are fair, that it's very, very difficult in positions like Nevada and like UNM. It's very, very difficult to create an environment of a team and build towards something when you have players all looking around fairly enough for their own self-interest, because again, that's the way the system is structured as it is now.
Yeah, no, and I think conference realignment goes to that. So it goes both ways, right? Because just as the students don't stay or the students go play professionally, the conference gets realigned. So it's all of a sudden you're trying to follow a conference and then all the teams leave. And so there's all these new teams. Like, it's really hard to create rivalries. So I just think all the way around, from the coaches to NIL to conference realignment, it just seems everybody's just wanting to chase money. And it's not necessarily about what you were saying, what it was originally for, which ecosystem is where we can't go backwards. There's just too much money involved.
Right.
I just think at the same time, there needs to be some kind of regulations, as you're saying, because I do think it's diluting the product. race for sure.
Yeah, it's like a pendulum that I think has swung too far in one direction. And if this continues and if product takes a hit or other things happen that cause incident, it'll swing back somehow in some form. Just may take a lot of time to realize that and see that play out. But in terms of the product, I will also say, I don't have the numbers out in front of me, but the ratings have been excellent for March Madness this year. That is something that seems like is doing well, especially compared to last year where there was the narrative was kind of like, well, there's no stars really in men's college basketball. Seems like they've kind of bounced back a little bit. So I guess, that speaks to interest in basketball overall, if nothing else, which is a good thing to say.
Yeah. Well, the tournament's the star.
For
March
sure.
Madness is a star.
For sure.
I think the question with that, and I talked it over with Jeff, is expanding the field. I mean, that is something that they have discussed, and they have already done it. But, expanding it to like 100 teams, I mean, you're just super diluting the field. I mean, what's the point of Selection Sunday? Everybody makes it. Everybody makes it. I mean, you already have some teams that are under 500 anyway. That made the field. And then we're debating like, okay, this team and that team got, robbed or whatever, but you had a mediocre season. You don't deserve to get in there. I mean, I don't know. It's just, to me, just keeping it, there just should be some exclusion. That's the whole point of a tournament. I mean, do we want to crown a winner or not? I mean, what are we doing? So that's my fear, is just them expanding the field. Just for more gains and more profit. That's just a concern.
I 100% agree. And actually, that aligns with some of my feelings about the play-in tournament in the NBA. But we'll save that topic for another day because we have other topics that I want to make sure we get into. There's been a lot going on since our last episode of In the Lab. One thing that has come to a head as we reach, for some teams, the last 10 games of the regular season or less, this MVP race that we have every year, seems like the top two contenders are spelled out and kind of locked in. It's just going to be a determination of which one of those contenders rises to the top. So 2 questions for you, Justin. Do you agree that it is a 2-contender race, those 2 contenders being Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Nikola Jokic once more? And among those 2, who do you feel is going to win the NBA? And then other question, who do you feel deserves the NBA MVP?
Yeah, I think to both of those, I think SGA, this is his trophy to lose. I say even if he gets hurt, not trying to jinx him, but even if he gets injured tomorrow or something, I still think he's probably going to be the winner. One, just because of bias, how this league works. One, I really just think the media, the powers that be, just don't like the Jokic at all, unfortunately. And we talked about that ad nauseum.
Agreed.
How much they've had just acts against him. So he's a multiple-time MVP, and when somebody's that close, and I think the media have other intentions in terms of determining who's the best player. However, I think SGA deserves it. I mean, it's not like his stats are poor or he sucks or he's on a bad team. I mean, they're on the best team probably, and you can argue better in the league. So season stats so far, according to NBA Kia MVP ladder, it's 33 points, 5 rebounds, 6.2 assists. He's the league's leading scorer, has 12 games of 40 or more points. And in his most recent 40-point game, he shot 17 from 26. That's incredibly efficient. Something you don't really see these days unless you're like Kevin Durant or something. Especially for an elite player, it's good to see that efficiency. Meanwhile, with Jokic, the problem is just with the Nuggets. I mean, they're always been kind of like a wobbly team in terms of what they're going to be able to do. And I think that kind of, when the race is this close, you go with who's on the better team. I think that's clearly the Oklahoma City Thunder, even though I think they're susceptible for an upset. But in terms of this regular season performance, I think the Thunder are better, and I don't think anybody's going to catch him. So I think for Jokic, a phenomenal season. I think he was even hurt. It is that he missed a few games here with some elbow and ankle injuries. I just think injuries are kiss of death, especially when you miss them consecutively. That's really hard to overcome. Again, I'd be shocked if Jokic wins the MVP. I'd be astonished. And I don't really think, you take a look, Donovan Mitchell, honest, but I would say maybe with Donovan, but I just think with the stats, the other 2 that I just mentioned are above him, despite the Cavaliers have a phenomenal season.
I agree. And Donovan Mitchell's numbers have actually come down from last season, but that's because of the Cavs' more balanced attack. So their team success has kind of hurt some of his individual stats. So I would agree with you that I think it's between those 2 candidates that you mentioned. I also agree with you that Shea is going to win this award this year, and I think it is primarily due to voter fatigue. And I just want to touch on this really quickly, that statistically so far, and we'll see how many games Jokic actually does end up missing, but statistically it is Jokic's greatest season of his NBA career, and the amount of work that he has had to do to keep the Nuggets as, at the time of recording, the 3 seed in the Western Conference is a much more difficult task than he's had in years past. He's had much less support. They've leaned on him. He's, you mentioned in your notes, like top 5 in assists, in points, in rebounds. He's averaging a triple-double, which is pretty unique, and he's doing it in dominant fashion. He's been, what was it? He had a 30-20 game, the first of its kind in NBA history a couple weeks ago. He's doing amazing things. So I would say wholeheartedly that if I had a vote, I would vote for Jokic this year. Because it's not a situation where, like when Westbrook won the MVP, he was averaging a triple-double in 2016, I believe. And the Thunder, it was impressive enough statistically that even though I believe the Thunder were the 6th seed that season, he had that narrative of course, Kevin Durant leaving the team that helped support his case for MVP. And then, of course, averaging the triple-double for that season was huge. Jokic is doing much more, and the Nuggets are a 3 seed, and arguably it's just as competitive, if not more competitive, of a Western Conference this season that he's doing that in. He's just barely underneath Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in terms of win shares, when the Thunder have won, I believe, like 14 more games, or they're like 14 games up above the Nuggets, which is an impressive feat in and of itself. So I think statistically, if you go analytics, and if you take that term literally as like the most valuable player to their team's success, it's hard to argue against Jokic. I wouldn't argue against it. Now, on the side of Shai, because these conversations always tend to turn into this feel of like I'm taking something away from the other person, and I want to make sure I iterate that I'm not. Shai is having a historically great guard season in NBA history. So he's having a season that is worthy of MVP recognition. I do place Jokic on top of him for the reasons I mentioned, but I do also agree with the points you made that I think because of voter fatigue and not a lot of buzz around Jokic overall, I think Shai comes out the victor this year.
Yeah. We'll see. I agree with you with that take. Yeah, I just think, the media has their axe against Jokic, which it sucks. I think even if he was the clear runaway winner, I still think he would have trouble winning the MVP, to be honest, just the way the media treats him. It's an uphill battle.
Yeah, and in NBA history, voter fatigue sets in at different times for different multi-MVP award winners. Like it's set in, it seems, much later for like Michael Jordan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You're talking some of the greatest of greats when you get into this multi-MVP discussion. It does kind of feel like it set in a little bit earlier with Jokic. He probably should have won, in all actuality, that year that Embiid won it. Although, of course, yes, it was a great season by Embiid. But this is the way it goes. There's just kind of, I think, relatable to like a Tim Duncan effect with Jokic too. Duncan.
That's fair.
Although it kind of was a counterintuitive thing, because it was like everyone would talk about, nobody ever talks about Tim Duncan. And that was like the talking point on Tim Duncan that everyone sort of recognized. And yet still, people were kind of quiet about Tim Duncan. Seems like Jokic has a little bit of that as part of the narrative of his career. Either way, 2 fantastic seasons by both of these players. I want to move forward, Justin, and this is maybe a little bit spicier of a topic that we haven't touched on. We had a lot of discussion about LeBron James and Bronny James as teammates early in the season, in the preseason, following the NBA draft. We had Kings of Sports podcast guys, shout out to them. We talked about it with them in length early in the season. And then it's kind of been quiet because the Lakers sort of did what they should have done. They put Bronny in the development league, and he's bounced back and forth, getting experience here and there. Recently, there was this whole controversy, and Justin, maybe you can summarize it better than me, but I believe the Lakers were playing in New York, and Stephen A. Smith was a guest of, blanking on his name, Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm, he was there as his friend and guest. I guess he had an extra ticket and invited Stephen A. Smith to be courtside or near there with him. He's on the court at some point during the game, and LeBron approaches him and kind of just chastises Stephen A. Smith. According to Stephen A. Smith, I think it was just kind of simply like, keep my son's name out of your mouth, and you can look up the video clip. I mean, LeBron knew the cameras are on, let's be honest here. He has that media savvy, so it's not anything that he was trying to hide. He was legitimately angry with Stephen A. Smith from what it seems. Justin, we haven't even really casually outside of the podcast talked about this, so I wanted to get your thoughts on this whole situation. Was LeBron's anger warranted? And just what are your thoughts on media criticism towards Bronny James at this point?
Well, it's interesting that you said that you think that LeBron was mindful of the cameras there, because I'm wondering what's the gain from that? Because the fuel of the media and what their whole, I guess, not only reputation, but their living is based on, it's Stephen A. Smith that needs that, not LeBron. LeBron plays in the NBA. LeBron's a legend. His whole source of income and popularity is based on his achievements on the basketball court, not thriving on media narratives. So that's what Stephen A. Smith does. He was a journalist. He's a commentator. He just got like $100 million contract from ESPN. I felt it peculiar. And I think, when you're mad, you do things irrational. You do things illogical. So clearly he was angry. And, in the words of Stephen A. Smith, not to use a curse word on here, but they don't F with each other. They have beef. They don't like each other. And it goes back before this whole Bronny situation occurred. And it gets escalated since then. So all that in saying, I'm not, I'm a fan, so I don't have any, jurisdiction to tell them what or what not to do. But I just thought it was weird for just LeBron. I understand where his anger is coming from. Look, I don't have kids, but, it's very easy, especially with Stephen A. Smith. He goes on his platforms. He said that he didn't say anything derogatory about Bronny. My bet is he probably did on one of these shows, and LeBron probably heard it. And I think, in my mind, he was trying to protect his son. However, you got to take a look in the mirror if you're a LeBron. You orchestrated his entire career.
Right. Exactly.
And you ruined, and I was talking about this, and I brought this up with the Kings of Sport, and I was going on a walk with my girlfriend talking about this, and she was right. Every single achievement that Bronny has, really, honestly, until he becomes the MVP or wins the title or something, if that does happen, it's going to be because of his father. Just him standing up on his own. LeBron took that away from him. When LeBron was in high school, he earned that. His parents didn't give him that media attention. The parents didn't put him on the cover of Sports Illustrated. LeBron did that. LeBron was the number one drafted pick in the NBA. LeBron had the great debut in his first game. LeBron, put Cleveland on his back. No one else did. LeBron earned that. And with his son, he has been coddled and protected. Let's just keep it real. And if his last name was Bronny, I don't know, Richardson, would he be in the NBA? Probably not. Probably playing overseas or, in the G League somewhere. But I think when you do that, yeah, he's going to get I tell you, you're right. To me, I think in my mind, you're harming the really accolades that Bronny could earn on his own by doing that. It's a fact that basically he threatened teams in terms of, if you draft my son, or I'm not going to come play for you. What do you expect? So I understand from the Stephen A. Smith aspect, do I, quote unquote, was I enamored for what he did? It gave us something to talk about. But I think it was kind of poor judgment. But I get the anger because he just hates the guy. It kind of makes sense from that aspect. But overall, the criticism of your son, yeah, people are going to criticize your son. People are going to criticize you. You set that up. Unfortunately, you robbed Bronny of earning those accolades himself. And instead, you laid this perfect path out for him, which he already had a great path. He probably had the best trainers, best food, best whatever. And then you also just laid this path where he just didn't earn it on his own. It's just, it's unfortunate, especially in this era where people are really against this nepotism. That's kind of a grade 8 example of that.
Now, a lot of great points there. I think we're pretty much aligned with how we view this. And you're right. To your point, we won't really, just objectively, we won't really know if Bronny is a legitimate NBA player until LeBron James retires because of how this all has been set up. And that's just a fact. I mean, we know LeBron arguably has the most power in the league from like a business perspective side, from face of the league side, even to this day. The man has a lot of power. The man can and has made NBA franchises do certain things, including arguably the most powerful NBA franchise in the history of the league, the Lakers. So LeBron has a ton of power, and his son has been able to benefit off of that. And again, I'll say the same thing I said in the beginning of the season. I hope Bronny James is a success story. I don't want to see him out of the league when LeBron retires or like a season or two after. I would like him to be a success story just for himself as an individual, as a man. I want him to succeed in this dream that he has of being in the NBA. But we're going to have to wait and see how legitimate that is. And hopefully he's able to deliver. Let me ask you one more thing before we move on, because honestly, the criticism that I have seen directed towards Bronny James, I feel, and I'm talking about mainstream shows, the stuff that gets quite a few clicks. I'm not talking about trolls in comment sections or things like that, of which I'm sure, as there is with just about any topic, I'm sure there are some horrible things that are said. But in terms of media analysis and criticism of Bronny James, I honestly have not heard anything that, even from Stephen A. Smith or otherwise, I haven't heard anything that seems all that like morally objectionable or offensive. It seems like pretty straight across the board. Everyone kind of sees what's going on here and what you and I have just outlined, that is Bronny actually a legitimate NBA player? And that seems like a very fair question to ask. Have you seen anything that, trips any other radars or alarms for you in terms of the content around Bronny James?
I don't think so. I think a lot of the criticism is valid, like you were saying, eliminating just the fools on social media. And I think him being in the G League, he has performed there in some spurts. And I think in this league, as we've seen, I mean, you don't have to be the leading scorer and everything to have a prominent NBA career. I mean, he could specialize in one thing and make tons of money and win tons of championships. I mean, I don't think that's really changed over the years. I think the problem is that, man, I mean, you remember with Michael Jordan, his kids, I mean, I think some of them, I think one or two of them play college ball, and like the national media attention of just like, that is an astronomical amount of pressure. I mean, it's already pressure enough with players like, Steph Curry with his father. But when you're dealing with LeBron, who some people say, we've had this debate later, but arguably he's the greatest player who ever lived. I mean, he's in that discussion,
Sure.
Whether people believe it or not. I mean, that is just, I mean, basically, I would say if he's in a public holding a basketball, somebody's going to come up to him and have some kind of comment about his father. I mean, I don't know. That has to have some kind of a toll on you, or so it has to have some kind of effect, positive or negatively. I do not know. But I think as he's gotten older, that pressure grows and grows and grows. And he's been in the media spotlight similar to his father, in this age of social media, probably since middle school. And already him going to USC and what's going to happen there, and him having just to deal with that medical diagnosis, already fairly difficult. And now you just, rob him of earning his spot in the NBA. Yeah, you're just putting more and more hurdles on him to be an elite player. I think he will get more chances than your other players in the G League, so he's gonna, I think, get his due. I don't think there's gonna be a bias from a owner or a coach's standpoint. I think he'll get his, like you're saying, when LeBron retires. I don't see Bronny out of the league immediately because LeBron is gone. I think he gets his shots. But in terms of the criticism, like you were saying, I think it's, a lot of the analysis is spot on in terms of how he's performed. I think in some way he's kind of exceeded expectations, and that goes to his character. And even with Stephen A. Smith, I don't think he was totally bashing him at all. I think he was, mostly bashing LeBron.
Yeah. And, that's kind of why I wanted to make some of these points, because Stephen A. Smith also tends to get one thing he and LeBron have actually in common. They both tend to get a lot of criticism for different reasons fairly or unfairly so. And in this situation, I honestly think LeBron might have overreacted a little bit. Now,
Yeah,
I don't know, on a personal level, if there's other stuff that we don't know about. Obviously, I'm not privy to that. But in terms of things that I've seen clips of Stephen A talking about Bronny or things like that, I haven't sensed like disrespect towards Bronny or LeBron James. It's just seemingly pretty objective, just criticism that public figures receive. Doesn't seem all that personal from his side coming to LeBron, but maybe there's other stuff we don't know.
Yeah, it seems like they just had a long-staying beef. And what I didn't like about Stephen A is at first addressing the situation, pretty apologetic, pretty respectful towards LeBron, respectful towards Bronny about the situation. He didn't go on a huge rant. But then he wanted to play tough guy on Gilbert Arenas' podcast. Shout out to Josiah Johnson, the host of that podcast. Guest of the show a few times. And he's just on there saying just, oh, that's weak. Just trying to be like, oh, I'm the tough guy, LeBron. He comes over. You're just like, what are you doing, dude? Like, you just said something different on your platform. Like, you can't just say, like, your words got misconstrued. Like, that was your YouTube channel, man. Like, I don't know. I didn't like that's how he changed his tune. I mean, I thought that was kind of more weak than the actual incident himself. Him wanting to play tough guy. I think kind of after the initial firestorm and hearing what people had to say, all of a sudden, I guess he got more into his feelings when he was on with Gilbert Arenas and those guys. But
yeah, maybe he was just disarmed a little bit on that podcast. Maybe he had his guard down or something and wasn't putting on a professional face.
True.
I don't know, but no, you make a good point there. Any other thoughts before we move on?
I don't. I think it's from a media perspective, it really just grew Stephen A's brand. And I don't know, it kind of plays into him just growing as a cultural figure in America, whether you like or hate the guy. It only grows from there. I mean, people are talking about him running for president. I think it just in this day and age, all bets are kind of off. So I don't know. I just think this is kind of a lesson for future players because it seems like other players that are friends with LeBron, they don't want to talk to Stephen A at all. I think it's a good lesson. Like, be smart about what you want in terms of confronting a media member because it might have the opposite effect in terms of what you intended it for. Because in this case, it made Stephen A. Smith a lot more popular, and I think it made LeBron look bad, even though if you can say LeBron might be in the right. I think Stephen A. ultimately, from a media perspective, probably won out on this one.
Agreed. And, I'll say, maybe there's like a 20% chance, maybe even higher, that all of this is just a scripted soap opera to get headlines for both gentlemen, but
Think so.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move forward. And Justin, I want to bring this topic up because we do regularly bring WNBA into the mix, topics on the show, especially as they have grown in viewership as well, but they've been around a long time. So we do like to highlight when big things are happening and big headlines are happening around that league. And there was controversy around some comments, correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but that Angel Reese made on her own podcast about potentially, in watching the clip, I did not watch the full episode of the show, so forgive me if it's out of context, but kind of joking around about getting into CBA meetings and being part of that discussion, and then also bringing up the idea of striking if player salaries do not increase. Justin, I just wanted to get your thoughts on this situation in general, and then also hypothetically, would there be any benefit in the WNBA in striking at this point?
So I would encourage our listeners to check out Joe Pabano. I think I'm mispronouncing his name. He's a media analyst, follows just the leagues around the world. Had a great podcast on this, very objective and pointing to the facts of this league. And to me, I am for the players, but you also have to go about math, right? So I'm going to get to Angel Reese's comments, and I'll kind of go to your answer there. So with Angel Reese, she said, quote, on her podcast, yeah, the CBA is coming up. We deserve more. Everybody. But we have to face the consequences. The women coming in next year probably going to make more than us. I got to get in these meetings because I'm hearing if you all don't give us what we want, we're sitting out. So first of all, I'm a WNBA player. Why is this other player speaking for me? So it's just like, why are you harming like my own way of making a living? You don't speak for the rest of the league.
And then
with
a rookie.
Yeah, you're exactly. I was, thinking the same exact thing. And I would honestly think the same way if this was Caitlin Clark saying this, despite how everybody feels about her. Like, you're only a rook. You're not the player's representative in a situation. So, in my opinion, I think in terms of a labor dispute and a lockout, you got to take it and look at economics, right? So I'm going to kind of compare this to mixed martial arts. We all know about the UFC and their draconian contracts. Basically, it is not friendly towards the fighters. They don't have a union. The UFC gets to do whatever they want. And if you take a look at the early 2010s or so, there's other MMA organizations such as Affliction, and they're paying their fighters. They're making buku amounts of money. That's what happened. They went out of business. And so the way the WNBA business structure is that they're owned. I think the NBA owns, I think 50% of the league. So to me, just the way the framework of the league works, it gets very complicated. And that's why I encourage everybody to listen to Joe Pepano's podcast. I just think in terms of the economics and how it works, in terms of what the players, I think they somewhat align with what Angel Reese is thinking. I honestly think a lockout's going to do a lot more harm than good. I think for the first time, I think in a long time, and we could talk to our analysts and maybe they can correct us. But in my humble opinion, at least in recent memory, this league has a lot of positive momentum. I think ratings are up, attendance is up, star power is up. I know it's unfortunate about Juju Watkins tearing her ACL, but she'll be in the league eventually. You have Paige Buckers. You have all this new interest along with your mainstays of the WNBA, and not to mention Unrivaled, which I did okay, but still it's more promotion for women's basketball. A lot of momentum with the women's game so far, and to lock it out, I think will be a colossal mistake. I know they want to get paid more. I understand that. But you take a look at the economics of the league. If the league can't do it, the league can't do it. Now, are there things that, from a NBA standpoint, they support the league? As I said before, I said that this a million times, and they lost money on this, and they should lose money on this. The players have to have chartered flights, period, in the discussion. There is no negotiation on that front. There are some rights that these players should have, they deserve, and if they can't give it to them, this league shouldn't exist. So from that aspect, they deserve that. From a monetary standpoint, I mean, you have to take a look at the economics of this league. I want to read this one more time and I'll be done. In a statement, this was fairly recently, from the WNBA PA Executive Director, Terry Carmichael Jackson, in regards to the CBA negotiation process. She said, quote, "As a union, we are fully engaged in the CBA negotiation process with the league, and our focus remains on securing an agreement that reflects the value and contributions of our players. Our members are passionate about the future of this league, and we're proud to represent a group that is united out in and pushing for a transformable deal that is fair. We won't comment on individual statements right now. Our priority is the work happening at the table. We'll provide updates as they move forward together." It seems like they weren't really necessarily enamored with Angel Reese's comments there. But I would say, for me, you got to be smart at this moment of time. And we saw with lockouts, I think even with the NBA, it was kind of different because the NBA has a long season. So when you contracted the season, actually kind of worked out. But NBA has staying power, is just different. And I think with the WNBA, I think this would cause more harm than good if we kind of look at the economics of it.
100% agree. And when we talk about economics, I mean, I'll just bluntly say it. This league has been fully supported and bolstered by the financial support of the NBA. And there's benefit to the NBA, I think, in playing the long game with that, because eventually they're going to, I still believe, financially benefit from this. The league has had incredible momentum over the last couple seasons, especially this most recent season. And to kill that momentum at this point, I think would be disastrous for the league, especially when you are, as we've talked about with guests on the show, you are going into expansion right now. I mean, I think a strike could potentially squash expansion or further planned expansion, which I think is the key to making this league profitable. The players had that added benefit of chartered flights, and it did incur a lot more costs. So while the league had a lot more rating success and you build momentum that way, they also had the greatest loss of profits that they've had, interestingly enough, over the course of their history. But that is because they raised the expense, and some of that also tied to expenses with marketing and other things like that too, which I think is the right move to build on that momentum that they've had. So you're hoping that that swings around over time, and that when another collective bargaining agreement happens, that you are then in a position where your league is profitable, because it's hard to make an argument for raising player salaries just in general. And you can take this away, you can apply it to any league. If your league is not profitable, it's going to be hard to pay the employees of that league, the people under contracts. So I think at this point in time, long story short, for all those reasons, it would just be disastrous to talk about a lockout even, and then furthermore to do a lockout. So I think it doesn't surprise me that the WNBA leadership is sort of speaking against that, maybe not calling Angel Reese by name or anything like that, but to talk about lockout at this point, it's a disastrous look for the WNBA.
I mean, I get how they feel. And I think even with Joe Pabano, he predicted that there will be a WNBA billion-dollar franchise. And I agree. But the NBA has to invest serious money into this league. I mean, if you're serious about this, you're going to have to take a hit for a while now to be serious about this. And I don't think the NBA was really taking this league that seriously. And I don't think the media partners were taking this league that seriously. I saw the coverage. It was pretty lackadaisical. So now that you have a star, I say a few like new mainstream stars in this league, you're going to have to invest a ton of money to make it happen. So we'll see. But I agree with you. I think a lockout would cause a lot of damage for sure. I agree in this moment of time.
Yeah, it's just tough because you don't know exactly when this league will be profitable, and that hopefully is the next collective bargaining agreement. But even that is not a guarantee at this point. I think you have to have like longer schedules to have more product to make more profit. The NBA is 82 games and the WNBA is a small fraction of that in terms of the season and the amount of product, and again, that's not like blaming the players or even necessarily the WNBA themselves, because I think they would like to provide more product if possible. It's just there are limitations right now because it is not profitable to this point from a financial standpoint. But I do agree that you're investing in it right now so that you make big profit in the long term, which I do still think would happen.
Yeah, I agree. Good point on just the level of games, because a lot of franchises, they cease to exist now. Houston, no franchise. Detroit, no franchise. Sacramento, gone, right? These are places that had teams. I'm only listing a few examples, and that causes a lot of, damage in terms of providing more games. And so now the WNBA is playing catch up. Like, you have to re-add these teams that you already had. So that's why you have the Valkyries, Toronto, Cleveland, etc. They're getting, they're trying to add those teams. So like you said, Matt, that we add more teams, they're going to increase more games. So that's going to add more revenues, but that's going to take time. And so let's see if the NBA is truly serious about this or not. So we'll see.
Yep. Last topic, Justin. We do have the playoffs right around the corner. There's a lot of talk I've seen and watched videos on analyzing the Thunder, analyzing other teams. So I'm going to say this. You can't pick the Thunder. You can't pick the Nuggets in the Western Conference if you want to go to that conference. And you can't pick the Cavaliers. You can't pick the Celtics. Those are, I think most people would agree, are bona fide title contenders at the moment. Give me a team who might make some noise in the playoffs. Maybe they're not going to be champs, but maybe they have a puncher's chance at that. Give me a team who might make some noise and surprise people in the playoffs. Any team you want.
So my answer to this is the Indiana Pacers. This based on last year's success, and it's based on the rest of the league. Now, it's very interesting because just looking up Gilbert Arenas says he has the Pistons and he has the Magic on being his sleeper teams. But you take a look, the Magic, they're the AC, they're under 500. And then the Pistons, I would say that's a good pick. I respect that pick of the Pistons. I mean, they're one of the worst. Weren't they the worst team in the league last year?
Yeah, I was just going to say, who'd have thought that we'd be having that discussion about the Pistons? 8 games over 500 right now. I mean, credit to them.
Yeah, that's a fantastic pick. So, I mean, I would say not the Magic, but the Pistons is another one. So I'll give Gilbert Arenas credit for that. But I feel with the Pacers, I think they have a chance to make some noise. And next, with Thibodeau there, those memories of Chicago always pops up with us playing his players too much time. And, saw what happened last year. I just don't trust them. And then with the Western Conference, I have to say this is probably kind of the weakest I have seen the West in quite a while, and a lot of I would say a lot of question marks, to be nice. I think really the Rockets, they're kind of unknown commodity in a playoff situation. And really, you take a look from the Clippers to the Wolves. I mean, if you eliminate kind of 9 through 15 from the West, and if you just take those toppings, they're all within a few games of each other. The Thunder have kind of pulled out in front. But these other teams, I mean, looking at the standings, they've all lost games. They either have lost like 3 games in a row or if they've lost a game. I mean, all through the standings except the Thunder. So to me, I think it was really hard when you put this topic on here. I'm like, who am I going to pick? And really, I was looking at the East, which is kind of shocking for me to say. But I would go with the Pacers being kind of the number one sleeper team for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, I do love that if things stay as they are right now in terms of the standings, we get that Pacers-Bucks rivalry again. That was a big deal last season. A lot of Giannis frustration when they were playing the Pacers. So we get that in the first round if things hold as they are right now. I will say, though, the Western Conference is deep. I mean, when you look at like the Timberwolves as the 8th seed, they're 9 games above 500. And I mean, that's like just above where the Pistons are as the 6th seed in the East.
Fair.
So the West is pretty deep.
Competitive.
But we've seen a lot of the teams get exposed by each other because they keep trading blows, you know. Now, definitely like 9 and 10 seed, they're sub 500 in the West. I mean, in the East, that starts right at the 7 seed with the Hawks, interestingly enough. So all those play-in teams really, you could argue if they should actually even be playing off teams at all, let alone play-in teams, you know, because their records are so trash, unfortunately. But that's just the way it goes some years, and this is not the first time that's happened in the East. Interestingly enough, you know, one more thing before I give a team, the Cavaliers versus Magic would be a rematch from last year, but this time it's with the Cavs, you know, on pace for like above 60 wins, certainly, maybe even up to the mid 60s, with the Magic sub 500 this year. And it was kind of at one point in the season a little bit of a reverse of that, with the Magic being top of the Eastern Conference last year for a stretch of time. So interesting that they now meet under very different circumstances if things were to hold as they are right now in the standings. Because that was a series that went down to the wire to Game 7.
That's right.
In the first round last year. So oddly, if the Magic get healthy, could be a sneaky competitive 1-8 series. Although the Cavaliers, under especially the new coaching of Kenny Atkinson, I do think the Cavaliers will be heavily favored and should be heavily favored. All right, so enough stalling. I'll go ahead and give a pick for the Western Conference, Justin. Let's talk about the Phoenix Suns. No, I'm just kidding. Let's talk about...
You're going to make Josh very happy.
Let's talk about, Suns sitting there at the 10 seed and may get leapfrogged by the Mavericks here before it's all said and done for even play-in tournament status. Just shockingly bad what's going on in Phoenix this year, watching that franchise deflate. So yeah, obviously they got to figure some stuff out. But let's talk about my real pick, which interestingly enough, I don't know how they would fare in their matchup versus the Lakers, but I got to mention the Grizzlies, a team that always kind of flies under the radar, and obviously with Ja Morant's presence and absence from time to time, it's obvious why you can't really take them serious as a top contender. But I think if they fall behind, they're on a 3-game losing streak right now. And if they fall into that 6th seed, if the Warriors leapfrog them and we get that sort of dream matchup of Lakers versus Warriors in the first round, and the Grizzlies take on the Nuggets in the first round. Now, I'm a huge Jokic fan. Everyone listening to this podcast knows that. But that could be pretty interesting because the Grizzlies may have more consistent scoring and more consistent defense to pit against the Nuggets and could give them some trouble in the first round. We haven't really seen them match up of late in the playoffs because of what's happened to the Grizzlies the last 2 years. And I'm also wondering if Ja Morant can be kind of a wrench in the cog of the Nuggets and be able to do some sneaky things to them from the offensive side of the ball. So I will go ahead and take the Grizzlies. I think the Warriors could potentially be an interesting pick here. I just avoided it because it felt a little too obvious, but you and I both know they've been on a tear since Jimmy Butler joined. He's been
Be
a
a good
great
pick.
fit there.
Yeah, Steph Curry got hurt, so that kind of put a little bit of that kibosh.
That's
So he's
right.
back though.
That's right.
So I think that'd be honestly a great pick if he didn't get hurt. But as long as he's back healthy, that could be another sleeper. But good pick on the Grizzlies though. I feel you on that. And what a you mentioned the Suns too. I mean, you mentioned that Mavericks leapfrogging him. The Mavericks barely have enough players.
That's true.
Let alone the most devastating trade in NBA history, let alone losing the acquisition that they're supposed to get. He gets hurt, he's coming back, but who knows if he could be healthy. So, man, I mean, that is, I would say, pretty disgraceful. So I don't know what's going to happen at Phoenix if that does happen. I mean,
yeah, and man, I know I alluded to this earlier in the show, but when you look at the Western Conference especially, like just give me the 1 through 8 seed as they are right now. We don't need a play-in tournament. I know it's pointless for me to say this because it's going to happen anyway. And the Suns or the Mavericks, one of those abysmal teams this year, is going to get a puncher's chance to get in. I don't think they should rightly have that reward with how their seasons have gone. And to be honest, the Kings as well, being sub 500. I do kind of, if I was NBA commissioner or some kind of all-powerful sports ruler or whatever, I would say, like, if you're sub 500, you're not in the play-in tournament. I'm sorry. That would be one of my stipulations. Obviously, play-in tournament still going to be considered a net positive for ratings and things like that. So it's not going to change, but there's my 2 cents on that.
No.
So
I agree with you.
Justin, thank you as always. It's been a blast chatting with you on these topics. And thank you, the fine listener and watchers of our show and channel. We really appreciate you guys. Let us know your sleeper picks. Let us know who your MVP is this season. Let us know, is there too much on this whole Bronny? Is this actually like a non-controversy? Or who do you put more at fault if there are sides to this? And then let us know what would happen if the WNBA were to strike. We'd love to get your feedback in the comments and respond to that and just continue the discussion there. So for Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. This has been another episode of In the Lab with Hoopsology. Take care. We'll be back real soon. Peace out.
See you later.